Hey, everybody. Welcome once again to the Winning Digital Customer Show. I'm Howard Tiersky, and today we're going to be talking about a challenge that any type of manufacturer or even other kind of service company has been having over the last, I'm going to go so far as to say, couple of decades in the world of digital. And I'm just trying to get my slide going here. I was having a little challenge, and I think I'm just about resolved with it. But the essential question is, in the old days, in the original, economy in this country, right? Go back 150 years, 200 years. Most people were selling direct, right? If you were a craftsman, you probably did your craft and you had a store where you sold whatever it was, pottery or iron stuff that you made or whatever else. If you are a farmer, you may sell stuff by the side of the road. Even today, we have farmers markets, places where people who make stuff or provide a service. If you wanted a service, you just go into someone's, place of business. If you needed a tailoring work done, so much of our economy, there was no difference between the creator of something and, if you will, the retailer of something. But then that really started to change at a certain point in time as our economy got larger and more complex. And you had, the appearance of things like the Sears and Roebuck's catalog, and then, of course, department stores like Gimbel's or Macy's. And then, of course, fast forward to our modern or relatively modern world, even, 20, 30 years ago, even when I was a child, you had giant shopping malls and you had things like QVC. You had this distinction between the people that make stuff, whether that's a company that makes cameras or a company that makes clothing or a company that makes food, and the people that sell it, that are retailers. You had this emergence of the retailer. It started with the general store and Sears and Roebuck's more than 100 years ago. And of course, today, there was a point at which most companies were choosing. They were either a retailer or they were a creator of some kind of goods or services, particularly in the world of, shall we say, goods. And if you look at Apple, for example, when the Macintosh came out, that's the model that they were in, right? They were a company that was manufacturing things. They were manufacturing computers. But if you wanted to buy a Mac computer, you weren't buying that from Apple. You were going and buying that from someplace like, the Byte Shop. Anyone remember the Byte Shop? Or some other computer store. And in fact, I remember there was a point in time where Apple had an education program. So if you were an education, like if you were at a college or university or whatnot, you could buy computers directly from Apple. And that was a unique privilege. That was the only type of organization that could actually buy directly from Apple. But anyone else, you had to go through a retailer. You couldn't just call up Apple and say, I want to buy a computer. Now, of course, and then, now, of course, that's totally changed. But even before we talk about Apple today, think about, Dell bursts on the scene in the mid 80s, right? And Dell has this idea that instead of like IBM or like Compaq, instead of making computers and selling them through stores, they're going to make computers and sell them direct to customers. And of course, this is not a new idea to sell direct to customers, but it was new in the computer world. And it was kind of a reversal in the sense that now you had a manufacturer going back and saying, no, we want to be integrated. We're not only going to be the manufacturer of the computers, but we're going to sell our own computers. We're not going to try to go through any kind of distribution channel. And of course, today, we see that model is being copied by a lot of other companies. For example, of course, Apple now has stores all around the world and a major e-commerce presence as well, where they sell their phones and their iPads and their computers and whatnot, and software and other things. And in fact, Apple is hovering around 50% of all of their sales are sold direct through one of their sales channels. And obviously the other 50% are sold through either stores like Best Buy or through telecommunications companies, right? A Verizon or a Sprint, or, in other companies, it might be in other countries, it might be another company. So, but nevertheless, that's a huge shift from a point in time when only colleges and universities could buy a Mac direct from Apple to the point that 50% of all their sales are being sold direct to customers. And we see this across a lot of industries. Look at something like the travel industry. There was a time when the vast, vast majority of travel, more than the majority, almost all travel was sold through travel agents. And if you wanted an airline ticket, you were going to a travel agent. Sure, you could walk up to the counter at the airport and buy a ticket directly from the airline, but that was not the primary way they were selling airline tickets. Today, while of course there still are people buying, not usually through the kind of old-fashioned travel agency where you sit down at someone's desk, but there certainly are plenty of online travel agencies like Expedia and Orbitz and Travelocity. But the travel providers, hotels and airlines and car rentals and such, cruise lines, they all have a huge focus on how to get companies to book directly with them, like Marriott, for example, and they're offering all kinds of additional perks and benefits if you book direct. Now, what caused this reversal from a world that had kind of gone from manufacturers selling direct to a world where most things were going through third-party distribution and third-party retailer to kind of move back towards a world where even large giant companies were selling direct? And of course, the answer heavily is digital, because it really wasn't practical for Marriott to put an office on every corner, to book a hotel room. But when all of a sudden, so many people wanted to book digitally, it of course became practical. And so while there are multiple complexities to this, this really was a force of digital making it practical for companies that were creating something to sell it direct. And it's true not only for goods and services, and I guess you could argue that certain things like a hotel room is a kind of a service, maybe a little bit of a hybrid, but like insurance, another space that I've worked, it used to be that the vast majority of insurance went through insurance agents, and all of a sudden insurance companies realized that they had an opportunity to sell direct. And of course, we now see a large volume of directly sold, certainly property and casualty insurance. It might be a little different with life insurance, and health insurance is its own thing, but certainly home insurance and auto insurance very, very often being sold direct to customers via websites, mobile apps, and call centers as well. So really, I think what I see is that a lot of manufacturers, they have this kind of struggle because there are benefits of selling direct, but there are also some problems and challenges. And in fact, I've worked with a number of companies that have gone back and forth on this issue of should they be selling direct or should they not be selling direct. So let's just talk a little bit about what some of the pros and cons are of selling direct. Well, one of the big benefits of selling direct is that you get to control the sales pitch. This is a huge benefit that Apple gets by having their own stores, their own, e-commerce channels. Instead of relying on some high school kid at Best Buy, when the customer walks up and says, what computer should I buy? They can really craft how they want that product sold, how they want it demonstrated, how they want the in-store experience to be. And of course, anytime you sell direct, that's one benefit that you get. A second is that you own the customer. What do I mean? Well, if I put inventory into a store and that store sells my product, I don't necessarily know who bought that product. I know that Best Buy sold 5,000 units, but what consumer bought those? Of course, what a lot of manufacturing companies have done for years is try to put those warranty cards or business reply cards in. You buy a toaster, and in there's something that says, be sure to apply for your warranty, fill out this card. And I mean, let's be honest, how many of us have ever filled out one of those cards and those postcards and mailed them back? Most people don't, right? So there really was this, there's a limit to the traditional model where you really don't get to know your customer too well. You don't know who they are. Whereas when you sell direct, you've taken a credit card, you've got their name, you've got their address. You now have a relationship with that customer that you could potentially use to sell more in the future, et cetera. And then the third is that you avoid the retail margin, of course, because if you make a product, you're selling it to a retailer. Very often that retailer is doubling the price by the time they sell it to the consumer. It depends on the category. But if you can, make a computer that is going to sell to the consumer for $1,500, if you can sell it to the consumer for $1,500 instead of selling it to the store for $750 and let the store sell it to the consumer for $1,500, obviously you have the potential to generate a lot more revenue. So these are the three big reasons why it's certainly a compelling idea for manufacturers to sell direct. But there are some challenges. So what are the kind of top challenges? Well, the first is it's not necessarily that easy to get a customer. Retailers, that's their area of expertise. They have stores where there's a lot of foot traffic, or they have websites that sell a lot of different things, and they're bringing customers in all the time. They have huge marketing engines very often designed to acquire customers all the time and bring them in. If you're just selling one thing, it can be challenging to acquire a customer. Easier now than it used to be because we have things like social media and such. But nevertheless, if you're the manufacturer, all you have to do is acquire the distributor, and the distributor will find the retailer, and they'll put your product out, and someone else has got the problem of actually getting that in the hands of the customer. Of course, they're going to take a big chunk of the revenue as a result. So that's the downside. But you now have that problem. You have to be good at solving that problem, which you didn't previously have to be good at. The next is shipping and just logistics. It's very different running a warehouse that's sending pallets of product to retailers than to have to deal with customers one at a time. And so there's a whole logistics issue that you have to get good at if you want to be in that business. But in addition to just the skills, there's the cost. And increasingly consumers online expect free shipping. And so depending on what you're selling, actually a bunch of that nice additional revenue that you get by not having to pay the retail margin can start to get consumed when you need to pay not only the pure shipping costs, not just what you have to pay like FedEx, but the warehousing, the people to put it in the box, to put the label on the box, to send it off, all that kind of stuff. So I mentioned logistics, postage. And then lastly, there's disintermediation. And what that means, disintermediation just means you're cutting out the middleman. Now, you might think, well, why isn't that a pro, right? That's how I avoid the retail margin. Yes, you're going direct to the customer. You're cutting out the store or the insurance agent or the travel agent or whoever it is that you used to give a big chunk of money to in order to sell your product or service. But the problem is, if you are still reliant on that sales channel for some of your sales, they may not be too happy with you when they see that you are essentially competing with them. You are not just a supplier to them, but you've become a retailer, and you are now competing for the retail customer. That can put can put pressure on your relationship with your distribution chain. And unless you're planning on going 100% direct to the customer, that can be problematic from a business perspective. So this is the kind of balance of equations. Gosh, we'd really like to own the customer. We'd really like to control the sales pitch, and we'd really like to not have to pay anyone else to sell our products. But on the other hand, then we got to deal with a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't have to deal with before. And we might annoy our distributors and our retailers, and they may therefore not be as friendly to us in carrying our product for the customer that does come into the store. So this is the challenge. And just as one example of how that struggle plays out, I worked years ago with Sony on a website called Sony Style. Sony Style was Sony's big direct-to-consumer retail play. It was a huge website. They were doing, I don't think I can say the numbers, but let's just say a lot of business on Sony Style. This was a successful e-commerce property back in maybe the early 2000s. Can't remember exactly when. And this was very, very successful. And a lot of people looking for Sony products were going there. It was the place you could get the latest and greatest Sony products. When Sony had a new cool product, they were launching it there first. They took advantage of the fact that they were the manufacturer to make what was really a great retail destination if what you were looking for was Sony products. So today they've scaled back. And if you go to Sony.com and you look for a product, you can find their product. But in the end, when you're ready to buy it, all you get is a where to buy button. You get a button that basically tells you which retailers can you find in your area where you can go buy this. Sony, generally speaking, there may be some product category exceptions, but not many. Sony is not going to sell you that product directly. Now, why? Probably mostly due to the last reason that I mentioned, disintermediation. At a certain point, Sony made a strategic decision and said, you know what? Even though we're doing a lot of business, even though we're avoiding the retail margin, even though we're successfully acquiring customers, it's putting too much pressure on our relationships with our critical distributors and retailers, and we're going to do a reverse course on this. So they abandoned their extremely, extremely successful strategy of selling direct and went back to a model where they acted as a pure manufacturer. They have a website, you can find their products, but in the end, if you want to buy them, you got to click a button and find your local Best Buy or your local, Circuit City, or I guess there's no more Circuit City, whatever. You've got to find some place to actually buy it. You can't buy it direct from Sony. So let me just mention a few other examples of how this struggle plays out. I mentioned Sony Style already. I worked with a cruise line where they made a huge push to direct. They made a huge, very public push to try to move as much of their bookings over to direct. They had their own call center, their own website. Now, of course, most cruise lines do this, but this particular cruise line did it in a much more public way, in a much more aggressive way, to try to get as much of the customer booking cruises directly with them rather than go through the travel agent. And what happened was travel agencies, especially travel agencies that had been selling that company's cruises for years, got extremely upset, and might be an overstatement to say that they boycotted that cruise line, but they became extremely unenthusiastic about putting their customers on that cruise line and started favoring competitors' cruise lines. And so much so that after a year or so of this strategy, they ended it. And they went back and they actually did a big apology tour to travel agencies. And they told them, we love you. This was a big mistake. They probably fired the person who did it. I don't know. And they really tried to reverse course because they realized that by the negative impact on their business from making their travel agents unhappy was not worth the additional money they were making from the extremely aggressive approach they were taking to book direct. And this company to this day still does take direct bookings, but they don't do so as aggressively. And they try to make sure that travel agents get credit so that if you call this company and you book direct, but you've already been working with a travel agent, they find out who that travel agent is, and they still make sure that travel agent gets a commission. So this is some examples of the struggle of companies that have sort of moved into the direct and then moved back. I'm not saying, by the way, that you shouldn't go direct. That's not my point at all. But I'm just trying to kind of flesh out what this challenge is that companies that are manufacturers or suppliers of products have when they try to go into retail, and what some of them have wound up doing as a consequence. On my podcast recently, I had the CEO of, or I guess I think it was the president of Europe for Foot Locker. And amongst many topics, you should definitely check out that episode. A lot of interesting topics we talked about. But in particular, he also talked about e-commerce. And one of the things he was saying is, everyone thinks that e-commerce is such a panacea compared to selling in the store because, well, you don't have the overhead of a store. And of course, Foot Locker has both, right? They have stores and they have e-commerce. You can buy their product online. But he said, the cost of running the warehouses and the fulfillment and the shipping sometimes means it's more expensive to sell that product through e-commerce than it is to sell it in the store. And this isn't necessarily a matter of, they're not, of course, a manufacturer, but I'm just making the point that if you decide to become a retailer and your main method is e-commerce, because of course, while there are examples, and Apple is an example of manufacturers who actually create their own retail stores, far more manufacturers who decide to go into the retail business is through e-commerce. And I guess the bottom line is, when you add up all those costs that I mentioned before, it can be disillusioning in terms of this is why retail is such a low margin business. And if you look at the profit of many retailers, it's in the single digits, and it's because it's a very tough way to make a living. And you might think, oh, well, they're doubling the price of every product. Surely they're raking it in. If I sell them a pair of shoes for $50 and they sell it for $100, they must be making a huge profit. Well, they have a lot of costs, whether it's physical or e-commerce, in terms of actually acquiring the customer, fulfilling to the customer, dealing with returns, all those types of things. Okay, just a few other examples of the struggle. For a lot of companies, if you sell inexpensive products, it can be very challenging to go direct to the customer. And another example would be a company like Crayola, who was another client of mine. And one of the problems is if you want to sell stuff online, but you're selling a box of crayons that costs, I don't know what it costs, $1.79, or maybe if you get the giant one with the pencil sharpener, it's, what is it, $8.99? But it's difficult to make money because of the cost, the handling cost, right? You get an order in, you've got to process that order, you've got to box that thing up, you've got to send it off, you've got to pay for shipping, because most of the time consumers are really resistant to paying for shipping. And if what you're selling is only worth, $8, $9, $10, then it could be that whole amount is eaten up by your cost of actually the transaction itself, getting the box out of your warehouse and all that. So that's not a problem for every company. If you're Rolex, you don't have that problem. But for companies that are selling products that are relatively inexpensive, this can be one reason why it's a struggle to try to sell direct. And then there's Amazon. And so forget selling direct as a manufacturer, almost every retailer on the planet is discouraged by Amazon, because Amazon is just so darn good. And they have relationships with so many customers, and they have Amazon Prime, which so many customers are signed up for. And customers are so loyal to the experience of Amazon that it becomes very difficult to compete even for pure play retailers with Amazon. Now, we could do a whole other live cast. In fact, we should on that topic, how retailers compete with Amazon, because there definitely are tactics. But the point is, if you're a manufacturer and you're like, hey, I think I'm going to start selling my products direct to customers, well, you've got to be prepared to deal with the question of, okay, how are you going to be such a good retailer, bearing in mind that your number one role is as a manufacturer? How are you going to be such a good retailer that you can actually compete with Amazon, the king of all retailers, assuming that your product is the type of product that will be sold on Amazon? And of course, there are hybrids. For example, you could sell your product directly on Amazon yourself through the Amazon Marketplace, and some manufacturers do that as an interim way of leveraging the Amazon platform. But of course, one of the challenges there is then you losing some of the benefits that we talked about earlier on. If you're selling your product through Amazon, you aren't owning the customer. You are perhaps cutting out some of the retail margin, but Amazon's still taking a chunk of it, et cetera. So it's a little bit more like traditional retail selling when you put your products into a shared platform like Amazon Marketplace. So those are some of the struggles that are present when manufacturers try to go direct. And I just want to talk about a few of the innovations. And by innovations, really, there are a lot of ways that I've seen manufacturers try to solve this puzzle. Some of them, like Apple, just go direct and are just really excellent at it and manage to make it work for them. But there are other kind of hybrid models. It's not necessarily all one way or the other. Or put another way, you don't necessarily always need to cut out your distribution or retail chain to get some of those advantages we talked about on the earlier slide. So I just want to talk for a moment about some of the innovations that we've seen. Here's an example, Simple Human. You may be familiar with Simple Human. They make a lot of kitchen type appliances. Really cool, like potato peelers or can openers. But one example I want to talk about is their garbage cans. Simple Human makes really cool garbage cans that you can like wave your hand and they open automatically. You can even speak to them and say, open garbage, which might seem silly, but when you don't want to touch a garbage can, it can be kind of nice to not have to touch it and be able to deal with it in another way. In any case, Simple Human sells a lot of their product through retailers like Bed Bath & Beyond. But what they do is they have a fulfillment service because they sell garbage bags that are specifically designed to fit their cans and look really good because there's a lip on some of their cans. And if you put the perfectly fitting bag on, and then you close the little sort of top cover part, you don't see the bag. It's not like one of those kind of old-fashioned garbage cans where you put a kitchen bag in and you see the edges of the bag kind of spilling over the side. So if you like that look, a nice clean look, they sell a bag that works with their garbage can and allows you to accomplish that. But they sell those bags direct. So they sell the cans in traditional retail stores because that's where people go to buy garbage cans. But once you get the garbage can home, there's stuff in the package that says, hey, download our app or go to our website and create a subscription to get automatic replenishment of your garbage bags. So now we have a company that's got a hybrid model. They're taking advantage of retailers to get their cans in people's homes, but then they're creating a recurring revenue stream by selling the garbage bags. And I've had Simple Human bags in my kitchen for, I think this is our second one, but probably 5 or 6 years of continuously replenishing those bags. To be honest, I have no idea what I've spent, but I'm guessing a lot more on the replenishment than we spend on the can. So in this case, even if they don't make a lot of money by the can that gets sold from Bed Bath & Beyond or wherever, they're making money on the garbage bag. So they've got a hybrid model where they're putting their main product, sort of like, give away the razor, sell the blades. In this case, it's deal with the margin attrition on the can. And then look, now they do own the customer, right? Now they do know who I am. They do have my email, my name. They know who bought it, even though it came through Bed Bath & Beyond, not because Bed Bath & Beyond told them, but because they created a strong enough reason for me to develop a relationship with them as a manufacturer, much stronger than when you buy a toaster and there's a card that says, fill out your information, put your address in those little boxes and put it in the mail so we know who you are. Most people, of course, as I said earlier, don't have much interest in doing that. Another example that I see both in travel and insurance industries is to offer commission or some level of commission on direct sales. For example, I worked with one insurance agency, provider of property and casualty auto insurance. And what they would do is they would advertise and they would get people to call their call centers or go on their websites and sign up for insurance. But once they sign up for insurance, they would transfer that account to one of their insurance agents who were like independent businesses, right? Because a lot of insurance companies are this way. It's like a separate small business, essentially, if it's your local Allstate or your local State Farm or whatever, your local Farmers Insurance office in your town is actually run by that person. They're not an employee typically of the insurance company. And so they were actually acting as a lead generation and a customer acquisition provider for their insurance agents. Now, there was some sort of model where if they went out and spent money and brought that customer in, then maybe that insurance agent didn't make as much commission in the first year or something like that. But it was a good value for the insurance agent. Instead of being at war with their kind of distribution and retail chain, they found a way to kind of coexist in a way that worked well for both of them. Here's another example, a little bit similar to the simple human example. I recently got a new oven for my house, and it's a GE Cafe oven, if anyone's familiar with it. And I recommend the GE Cafe oven. It has a lot of cool features, and it has an app associated with the oven. And the app allows you to do some pretty cool things. For example, I can scan the barcode on like anything that I buy in the store. Like if I buy like a frozen lasagna or something, I can scan the barcode and it will figure out what that is. So that's Stouffer's family size frozen lasagna. And it will program my oven for the right temperature and the right amount of time to cook that lasagna without me having to do anything else. So that's a pretty cool feature. And then I still have to put the lasagna in the oven though, which kind of gets me down. It seems to me like if it was really cool, it would actually take it out of the box and put it in the oven. But I guess that's coming maybe in the next version of the app. In any case, point is, they have created additional value that they're adding in the digital world to the product. So even though I bought that product from a local appliance store and they came to my house and they installed it, and in theory, GE has no idea who I am, now they're convincing me that I should download their app. In order to use the app, I have to create an account. So now they have my email information. They know, of course, what product I have. And then if I get more GE appliances, like if I get a microwave from them or I get a refrigerator from them, it's the same app. So now pretty soon it's the same account. So now they start to know that I have multiple GE appliances. And I don't think I've seen it yet, but I am sure that they're going to start marketing to me that I should buy more GE appliances and how they're all going to work together. So there's another example where you can start to build a relationship with the customer, even if you don't necessarily sell direct. Now here's a different kind of example. This is Igloo. And this is actually another podcast I did recently with the chief marketing officer of Igloo, also something I would definitely recommend you check out. But in that podcast, he talked about their e-commerce experience. And you know, when they first started to do e-commerce at Igloo, they had some of the challenges I mentioned earlier about shipping. They said, you know, the coolers we sell are available in a lot of places. Like you can go to Walmart or you're probably a grocery store and buy like an Igloo cooler. It might cost $25. It's big, right? So if you order it from them online, it's expensive to ship because it's just a big bulky item. And so it was very difficult for them to make it make sense for somebody who could just go buy something in the store to go online and order that same big bulky thing, because if Igloo gives them free shipping, Igloo can't make any money. And if Igloo charges them for shipping, well, it just doesn't make sense for the consumer, right? Because they can just go to their local store and buy the product. But what Igloo started to do was develop exclusive products, special higher end tools for people who are camping and wanted something really advanced, or specially branded coolers with niche brands that you might not find in your local store, like a cartoon character you love, or a sports brand that may not be available in your local store. So they actually created exclusive product that they could sell online that was actually also worth more. So now instead of trying to sell their generic $25 cooler, they were selling a $75 item or a $150 item, and it was an item that really wasn't practical for the retailers to carry. The retailers didn't even want to carry those products because they were too niche. You know, retailers don't want to have enough shelf space to have 50 different Igloo coolers with every cartoon character on the planet. It just doesn't make sense for them. So the retailers didn't necessarily care that Igloo was doing it because it was a different product and it wasn't what they were trying to sell in the store. And the consumer was willing to pay more. And even in the digital world, they were able to then target using Facebook ads and things like that to find the people that wanted these niche products. So in this case, what Igloo did is, again, it's a hybrid. They said, well, you know, certain of our products are actually better if they mainly focused on being sold through our traditional distributors and retail stores, but there's other products we can develop to build a really great e-commerce business. And that's what Igloo did. Nike, I'm not going to go into detail, but you probably know, of course, they sell a lot through distribution channels, but they have special customized products. You can go on the Nike website and you can make your own sneakers with certain colors, and you can sort of trick them out just how you want them. Retailers aren't too interested in this, right? You know, Foot Locker doesn't have a way for you to go in and order a customized Nike sneaker where you make the swoosh one color and the rubber of the sole another color. Again, it's a little bit like what Igloo's doing, right? In this case, it's a one-to-one product, but it's just not the kind of product the retailer wants to sell. So those are just some examples. I tried to tee up for you kind of the sort of the conundrum, if you will, the manufacturers or producers of some sort of product or service have when trying to figure out whether they should go direct or whether they should go through traditional distribution channels. And it reminded me of a book. You know, many years ago, I worked with for Ernst & Young Consulting. That's really where I started my career. And I spent the first 15 years of my career both with Ernst & Young Consulting and then Capgemini, that at one point acquired Ernst & Young's consulting practice along with me. And then about 14 years ago now, I left and started my own company. But back when I was at Ernst & Young, this book was published. I had nothing to do with it, but it was a great book by a guy I knew named Chris Meyer, and then a guy I didn't know named Stan Davis. But in any case, it's called Blur, and it was really talking about how the digital economy is causing a lot of things to blur together. Now, this is a book that's almost 20 years old, so I'm not going to necessarily recommend you go read this book. At this point, it's probably quite dated. But what we're seeing here is that manufacturers are trying to become retailers. Some retailers, by the way, are also becoming manufacturers. Look at Amazon. Amazon's making, obviously their Kindle devices, the various Alexa devices. Plus, they're creating more and more, branded Amazon products. So you have retailers that are trying to create more custom products. And even companies like Macy's are trying to create more and more custom products that they can sell that will be unique to them to compete with the kind of, open market of the internet. Manufacturers are increasingly trying to become retailers, or at least looking into it, as we've been discussing. And everybody's trying to become a media company, because we no longer just want to put ads on media that media companies create, but we want to have our own YouTube channels and our own, social media channels. And brands recognize that content marketing is a critical thing today. And so the distinctions that we used to have between, I'm a manufacturer, I'm a retailer, I'm a media company, these are kind of the three key parts of the product ecosystem, right? Media companies create a way to find consumers and tell them about your product. Retailers create a place for them to buy it, and manufacturers supply the product. That's all becoming increasingly blurred together. But as we've been talking about, it's not as simple as just saying everybody needs to be everything, because there are some challenges when you try to be everything. So hope this has been useful, just trying to give you a perspective on what is really a complex situation. There's no one right, perfect answer. We can say, the answer is every manufacturer should be a retailer. I don't think that's true. I think it really works well for some. For others, well, as we've seen from big companies with huge resources like Sony, they move in that direction, and then sometimes they reverse course and realize that strategically, it's just not the smartest thing for them. So hopefully this has been helpful, just to lay out what some of those issues and considerations are. As always, I'm always fascinated to read your comments, so I definitely encourage you to please, comment about what we've been talking about here. Feel free to disagree. Feel free to add your own thoughts and insights, whether it's on the LinkedIn comments below this, or on Facebook or YouTube, or wherever you happen to be watching this. And with that, I thank you for watching and listening as always, and I will see you next time on the Winning Digital Customer Show. Bye-bye.